My task today is to talk about managing risk in complex mega projects. As you heard in the introduction, I'm known globally as the risk doctor because risk management is my passion, it's my focus. I believe that risk management is the most important thing we can do in our projects, in our businesses, and in fact in our lives, because our ability to manage risk successfully is directly correlated with our ability to succeed. Because risks are the things that would divert us from success. So if we can manage our risks successfully, we give ourselves the best possible chance to succeed. And complex mega projects are a particular challenge, as you will know if you've ever been involved in one. And so I'd like to talk today about how we can apply the risk management thinking to the challenge of complex projects. And very often these are called mission impossible. And the reason for this is very simple. Over time, projects are getting bigger and bigger, and so we now have mega projects, where previously projects were more controllable and more had smaller teams and smaller budgets and so on. Project complexity is increasing, so we increasingly have projects which have more scope, which have more systems and subsystems, where we have larger teams, international supply chains and so on. Which gives us what's called a wicked problem, which is not easy to solve through standard analysis. And in addition, the pace of change is accelerating, which leads to volatility on our projects, which makes them, again, difficult to control or to manage. Now, I use this phrase mission impossible, and it may remind you of the film franchise. There are a whole lot of films called Mission Impossible, which might actually help us to understand something about the challenge of our complex mega projects. I don't know whether you've ever seen any of the Mission Impossible films. There are a lot of them, but they feature heroic effort from Tom Cruise as the superstar professional, or Ethan Hunt as he is in the films, who always has to work incredibly hard in order to solve the problem that he's given. But he's not working alone. He has high levels of technical support through a very skilled team that works with him. These films have huge budgets, millions and millions of dollars in order to make them possible, and amazing special effects. And it always seems that at the last minute, despite all of the challenges that this team has in resolving the problem in the film, somehow it always turns out okay in the end. And they have some kind of good luck where amazingly everything works out and Tom Cruise goes home as a hero. I don't know whether these things sound familiar to you if you're involved in complex mega projects, but very often our mega projects are very similar. We expect to have heroic efforts from a superstar project manager. We're supposed to have lots of high-level skilled support and big budgets with special effects available to make sure that we can get our projects online and keep them on track. And somehow everybody seems to think that we can rely on good luck at the end to make sure that our projects succeed. It's a bit of an impossible challenge, isn't it? And I don't know whether you think that this describes your project, especially if you're that superstar professional who's put in charge of the whole enterprise and told to make it work. Do we have to rely on this kind of solution, or is there another solution which involves managing the risks involved in complex mega projects explicitly? And I'd like to suggest to you that we don't need to rely on heroic superstars and skilled support and huge budgets. There is a risk management approach which can help us to deal with the challenges of complex projects. But before we get into the risk solution, I'd like us to address three key questions about complex mega projects. The first is, are complex projects different from ordinary projects? What makes complex projects different and special? And the answer is yes, they are different, because they are inherently built into them ambiguity and unpredictability. And this comes from the nature of complexity. And hopefully you can see these two images to suggest to you the difference between a project which is complex and a project which is merely complicated. Now, these two words sound similar. They've clearly got some relationship together, but the roots of the words are completely different. So if we go to the Latin root, com means with, and complexity comes from the word complectere, which means to knot or to braid together. Whereas complicated, the word is com with plicate, which means a fold And the difference is that complicated projects, and you can see here we have an origami bird made of folded paper. With a complicated project that's made of many folds, if something is complicated, you can fold it up and unfold it, and then repeat the process to fold it up again, and unfold it and refold it. All you have to do is to follow the set of instructions in order to get the outcome that you want. But with something which is complex, which is made up of knots and braids, and the picture of some pasta, some spaghetti illustrates this very well, you can't have that same level of deconstruction and repeatability. If you pull a piece of spaghetti out of the bowl, you can never put it back. Whereas if you unfold the bird, you can refold it very perfectly. If you pull on a piece of spaghetti in the bowl, you have no idea what else might move. There are connections and relationships which are not visible. And so complexity, because there are knots and twists within the nature of the complex project, it's not possible to predict how the project will react. Complex is different from complicated. So complex projects are different by nature. Built into them, there are those level of interdependencies and relationships which make them entirely unpredictable. And that necessarily makes them more risky. Here's a second question. Do complex projects have different risks from normal projects? Well, certainly complex projects have the same typical risks that you would expect in any project, risks to do with supply chain and to do with customer change requests and to do with technology and our people risks and so on. But because of the nature of complexity and that ambiguity and that inability to predict how complex projects will react, complex projects are also subject to emergent risks. And here is a picture of a black swan to remind you of the kinds of emergent risks that we have to cope with in complex projects. It's not just the standard risks that affect every project, but because of the nature of complexity, we also find risks arising unexpectedly. The three characteristics of a black swan, according to Nicholas Taleb from the 2007 book. The first characteristic is that they are entirely unknowable and unpredictable. They're inconceivable. They're outside of our frame of reference. We couldn't imagine what would happen. But if it does happen, it has an extremely large impact. And when we see it happening with hindsight, we say, oh, we should have seen that coming. And that certainly is the case with complex projects. There are things that happen on complex projects that we could not have imagined because of the nature of the complexity. But when they happen, they have a big effect on the project, and it seems as if we should have seen them coming. So yes, complex projects do have different kinds of risks from normal projects. So does that mean that complex projects are unmanageable because they have these emergent risks? Can these new types of risk be managed? And the answer is yes. Traditional risk management can be used for traditional typical risks, but we can find a different approach to deal with emergent risks. And I'd like to suggest to you in this presentation that we can use futures thinking as a way to help us tackle complex projects with emergent risks. So what do I mean by futures thinking? Futures thinking has a standard process, which I'll explain to you, and a number of different standard techniques. We don't have the time to explore it in lots of detail, but let me just outline the process first. With futures thinking, the first thing we do is define our preferred future. What is it we're trying to achieve through our complex mega project? And this is a standard objective setting step that all projects have. What are we here for? What are we trying to achieve? The second step in futures thinking, once we know our preferred future, this is what we want to happen, is to identify all possible futures. In addition to what we want to happen, what could happen? What are the alternative possible futures? And within that rather large set of possible futures, which ones are probable? So we analyze the set of possible futures to work out which ones are most likely to happen. And of course, what we want is for our preferred future to be one of those probable futures. We want our preferred future to have the best possible chance of happening. And so we need to manage the future to make our preferred future as probable as possible. I hope that makes sense. I'll show you a picture. Just here on this slide are some techniques we can use for identifying possible futures, and I'm sure you're familiar with at least some of these: standard scenario planning, visualization techniques, horizon scanning, or a specialized technique called field anomaly relaxation. All of these different techniques you can discover more about on the internet online, or I can help you maybe if you'd like to explore them at a later time. But just to revise or review again the futures thinking process, let's try and make it in a picture. The first thing we do is we define our preferred futures. What are the objectives of our complex mega project? What are we trying to achieve? And then we identify the full set of possible futures, all those things that could happen. And of course, our preferred future will be one of those. Our preferred future should at least be possible. We then analyze the possible futures to identify the probable futures, the ones that have the biggest chance of happening. And then we manage the future to make sure that our preferred future is the most probable. So that's the futures thinking process. Now let's just think about how we're going to achieve that. It sounds great to say identify the futures and manage the futures. And if there was only some kind of specialized computer or some artificial intelligence or some machine that we could use to view the future and to see what's coming, then maybe we might be able to do that. But as this cartoon shows, maybe our ability to visualize the future is perhaps limited. Or is it? Maybe risk management is the solution. This is where risk management comes into the picture, because risk management offers us a forward-looking radar, a radar that scans the future, that looks ahead and says, what is out there coming in my direction? What could happen? And then risk management gives us analysis techniques to find within those possible futures which ones are most likely. We can analyze those alternatives to see there was a shadow on my radar across here, but it's quite small and moving slowly. Here is a signal on my radar across here, which is big and glowing and moving very fast towards me. We can work out which amongst the possible futures are most probable. And then risk management offers us the techniques to manage the future, to change what's going to happen by the decisions, by the choices, by the actions that we take here and now. So risk management is essentially a way of managing the future from the present, thinking ahead about what might happen and taking actions here and now to change the future. Let me illustrate. If we imagine this diamond represents now, the point that we have now, and as we stretch into the future, there are a range of possible things that could happen. So we have a number of paths from time now which our project could take. Some of them might be good, some of them might be excellent, some of them might be bad or poor, some of the futures might lead to a crisis or a disaster. And there will be, of course, unknown and unknowable futures as well. There's a whole range of things that might happen in the future. And the first step of futures thinking is to work those out through those techniques which we talked about. What could happen on my project? Then what we do is we take action. So you'll see from the bottom of the slide that we've moved from the old time now to a new time now after we've taken some risk management actions. We've changed the future through managing the risk that we identified in our original analysis. And so what we've done, if we think about that set of futures that we identified, some of those futures we've made impossible because of the choices that we've taken. So the futures that were disastrous or that were a crisis, we've managed to avoid those. Some of those futures we've managed to make the bad thing less bad, or we might have been able to make the good thing even better. And we might have had some unexpected effects as well, where we've unfortunately wiped out some potentially good futures. But the point is that by taking action through risk management, we're changing the future. Our goal is to make the bad futures less likely or preferably impossible, and to make the good futures more likely and better. But risk management not only changes those previously possible futures, adjusts the things that we thought could happen before, but risk management introduces a whole set of new futures, things that weren't possible until we had taken our risk management actions. So we have some new good outcomes, some new really good outcomes, There might be some new bad outcomes as well that we've introduced through our actions. And clearly we need to analyse these as well. So risk management is an iterative way of changing the future through our actions, of assessing what those new potential futures are, and continuing to take analysis and action in order to change the future, to move our preferred future where we achieve our objectives into that place where it's most likely. So that's what risk management is doing. It's changing the future by making some of those futures that we identified less likely and others more likely, and introducing new futures that were not possible until we took action. So how do we do that, managing the future proactively? For typical risks, it's just traditional risk management, using the standard risk response strategies to address the bad risks, avoiding them, transferring them, reducing or mitigating or accepting them, and also managing our upside risks, our positive risks, our opportunities, the uncertainties that can improve our chances of working faster, smarter, cheaper. We can exploit those opportunities, share them with others, enhance them or grow them, or just accept them with contingency plans. Standard risk management for typical risks. Even in normal projects, standard risk management is managing the future. But we also find that complex mega projects have emergent risks in addition to typical risks. And for emergent risks, which arrive as surprises, black swans which come unconceivably, unpredictably, it's not possible to use these standard risk response strategies because the emergent risks appear too late for us to be proactive. So we need different approaches to manage the risks in complex mega projects. We need different approaches to manage emergent risks. We can't just use standard traditional risk management. So in our futures thinking, when we've identified our preferred future, we've done our scenario analysis or visualization techniques to think about possible futures. We've worked out which are the most likely and then taken risk management action to change the future. How can we change the future for emergent risks where we're not quite sure what they're going to be, where they are unpredictable because of that nature of complexity being more like spaghetti than origami? Here we need a different approach to managing the future for emergent risks. And I'd like to suggest to you something which I call project continuity management. It's rather like business continuity management, which I'm sure you're familiar with at the organizational or enterprise level. Business continuity management says we need to think about our areas of vulnerability, the things in our business which are most important, and protect them in advance, and also think about ways in which if something happens unexpected, we can recover really quickly. Why should we only do that at the business level, at the enterprise level? Why shouldn't we be asking those very same questions at the project level? How can we protect ourselves in advance for something which we can't imagine? And how can we prepare ourselves to recover as quickly as possible if something unexpected actually does happen? So project continuity management is a child of business continuity management. It's a development of business continuity management. And essentially it has two key response strategies. The first of the two key response strategies in project continuity management is flexibility. We need to build flexibility into our complex mega projects. Flexibility is defined as the ability to bend without breaking. You may practice yoga in your personal life, and you'll see this picture on the right of a person being extremely flexible with his arms and legs in all sorts of strange positions. It really is a photograph of a real person, but his level of flexibility is extreme. He's able to bend all sorts of things without breaking anything. Or the ability to adapt to our environment really quickly. When something changes, we change. Like the other picture on the right, the chameleon. When it's put on a green background, it goes green. When it's put on a brown background, it goes brown. It adapts immediately to its environment. And a very important proverb, the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. Flexibility so that we can bend without breaking. The second key response strategy for emergent risk is resilience. the capacity to maintain our purpose in the face of challenge and regain our original shape if something comes in and causes deformation or disruption. And you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, there was a sprinter who gave up. What we're trying to do is to run a marathon with our projects, keep going to the end, despite whatever comes in that might disrupt us or disturb us. I use this phrase, COCO. We have to keep on keeping on, just taking the next step, the next step, the next step until we come to the end. And maybe you've seen those little stress relieving things that you can hold in your hand and squeeze really tight and express all your stress by the way you squeeze the ball, and then you let go and it bounces back to retain the original shape. Bounce back ability is a characteristic of resilience. So we need to develop flexibility so that we can bend when things change, and resilience so that when the stressor is removed, we bounce back and can continue. These are the keys to managing emergent risks, project continuity management for our complex mega projects. So how are we going to do that? Let me quickly suggest to you some areas in which we can build flexibility and resilience into our projects. And they occur at a number of different levels. At the project level, we need to be sure that we know where we're aiming. So we need to have clear objectives with appropriate levels of risk budget, management reserve and contingency built into our budgets, flexible processes that can enable us to respond to the situation around us without being tied into having to do this and get a signature and this and issue a report and this and do an analysis before we can take action. So our processes need to be responsive. And of course, strong change management to enable us to address the impact, the consequences of things changing around us. There's also an impact for flexibility and resilience at the personal level, at the individual and team level. We need to have effective leaders with empowered teams, leaders who say, it's okay, I know where we're going, follow me, I'm in charge, that have that confidence and trust that the team will follow, and a team who are empowered to do their jobs without always having to check back and get approval. It's important that we have emotional literacy or emotional intelligence skills, the ability to understand how people are feeling, including ourselves, and to moderate our internal environment so that we can adjust the way that we feel when things change around us. Some people find change really difficult. Some have low tolerance for ambiguity, and others are more robust in their person. All of us can learn to deal with these things through emotional literacy and adopting positive attitudes that say we're not beaten yet, the project is not over, we can make a change through our choices. So flexibility and resilience is important at the project level and for the people. It's also important in our technical solutions through the use of iterative developments, design redundancy and so on. At the contractual level through our terms and conditions with clearly marked out boundaries of responsibility and accountability, and at the business organisation through having a clear corporate culture which expresses what's important to us and how we're going to handle these things, which has a set of grounded values so we know who we are in our organisation, which can help to provide a context when things are changing around us, and of course strong stakeholder engagement processes to make sure that we can communicate with our stakeholder network when things are changing and keep everybody on board and engaged. If you wanted one word to summarize all of these things, it would be this word, agility. When something changes around you, when emergent risk appears on your complex mega project, we need to be not frozen, but able to flex and change in a way that retains our purpose and enables us to bounce back afterwards. So agility, not meaning agile development methodologies, but organizational, personal, project and business agility to make sure that we can flex to respond to what's in front of us. Here's a lovely saying that I like: if we can't control the tides, we can learn to build better boats. We can't control the tides. Things will happen around us. The winds will blow, the water will rise, things will happen, but we do need to make sure that we are building in robustness and strength and resilience in order to respond appropriately. Or here's another phrase that I heard actually only last week: if we can't control the waves, we can at least learn to surf. Maybe that's a bit more of a positive way of saying the same thing. So let me give you a few final thoughts before I wrap up and see if we have time for some questions, or maybe we'll just finish at this point. It's important for you to recognize that complex mega projects are different from standard projects. On the left, we have a picture of a railway track. Many projects are seen in this view, that the track for the railway represents our project plan. It has a starting point, it has a final destination, it has some stations along the way, which we might call milestones. It has a track which determines the path in advance. It has a ticket price. You buy your ticket to get on the project train and you leave on time. You stop at the first milestone on time, the second milestone on time, you finally arrive at your destination. That might be true for some projects. It's probably not true for complex mega projects. Much more like the picture on the right, where we're trying to sail a small boat across the water where the winds are blowing and the tide is changing and there's big waves and there are things falling in, boats coming in front of us. We're constantly having to change direction, go left and right, maintaining our view of the objective. This is much more like a complex project where we have to respond to the situation around us while still keeping an eye on where we're trying to go. If we try to run a complex project as if it was the picture on the left, we will fail very surely. What we need to do is to make sure we have that flexibility and resilience built into our projects, which the picture on the right suggests. So let me sum up with these thoughts. Managing risk in complex mega projects requires an ability to think about the future. Futures thinking involves, first of all, defining our preferred futures through objective setting, then identifying the possible futures, what could happen, and within that, analysing which of those futures is most likely, and then changing the future to make sure that our preferred future is the one that actually happens. Using standard traditional risk management techniques for typical risks, but then using project continuity management with flexibility and resilience built into our projects to handle emergent risks, ensuring that we are agile at all levels, project, personal, technical, contractual, and organizational, so that we maintain our focus on where we're trying to go, no matter what happens around us. And if we can do that, then we'll be moving from Mission Impossible, a kind of project where everyone says, you know, this will never succeed, through to the ability to declare mission accomplished through our ability to manage risk. Well, I hope you found that useful. I am happy to handle any questions, or maybe just to leave it here and allow you to think on this in the future. These are my contact details. I'm very happy to take questions offline afterwards and to address the sorts of thoughts that you might have. But I do wish you success in managing your complex mega projects, and some of these techniques I hope will be very useful to you. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to stop presenting at this point and hand back to the moderators.
Thank you very much.